This production is made possible through the generosity of the members of the GEM Foundation.
Hello and welcome to this special program, the Rebbe's Approach on Antisemitism. Now, the Rebbe himself was no stranger to antisemitism. He lived in Berlin during the early 1930s and watched the rise of the Nazis literally firsthand. In fact, he experienced antisemitism up close and personal throughout his life. He hid from pogroms as a young child under the Tsars. Then later under the Soviets, his father was arrested, sent to exile, and passed away there. He was right there when his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, was sentenced to death in Leningrad in 1927. His brother was murdered by the Nazis. And frankly, the entire start of the Rebbe's leadership was framed by the aftermath of the Holocaust. And yet, most of us, including many scholars who are well steeped in the Rebbe's teachings, are hard-pressed to articulate the Rebbe's views on how to handle antisemitism. Here, the Rebbe had experienced so much antisemitism, and he believed, by the way, that it's basically a rule of physics. Halacha esav seina liYaakov. The sages teach that antisemitism is hardwired into the world. But on the other hand, he didn't focus on it much at all. And that exactly is how it seems the Rebbe chose to handle antisemitism, to not allow it to become too major a focus. So we'd like to share what we found on the topic. The Rebbe really looks at the macro, the very big picture. We'll explore the cause of antisemitism, then we'll look at how to avert it, and some practical do's and don'ts in dealing with anti-Semites. Our goal is to lay out the ideas we found in an organized fashion. I'm sure others will advance the field further, write articles, and whatever else. Now, on Purim of 1965, the Rebbe did speak about anti-Semitism in depth, why they hate us, and an overview of the Jewish approach in combating it through the generations. The Talmud and Tractate Megillah tells a parable about the Purim story. Purim is, of course, the classic anti-Semitism story. Haman comes to Achashverosh with the ambitious but very real plan to kill all the Jews in the entire world on one day.
Sagt die Gemorre im Gile, als gewinnt zwei im Schnee, was einer hat gehad hat Teil und ein zweiter hat gehad hat Charit. Als bei einem in sein Erd, was so zu ihm beleidigt, die gewinnt eine Kuppe mit Erd, ein Teil von Erd. Beim zweiten, die gewinnt Charit, gewinnt eine Grube, wo sie gewinnt ein Loch in der Erd. Ist gekommen der Baal HaCharit zu dem Baal HaTeil, oder der, was bei mir gewinnt, die Loch in Erd, was das hat ihm gestört. Sie haben gesagt zu dem, was hat die Kuppe Erd, dass hat ihm bezogen. Und soll ihm verkaufen dem Teil, wird haben mit was zu verschieden dem Charit. Hat ihm der Baal HaTeil gesagt, als Abi, nimm das zu und ich darf nicht haben deine Geld. Und das sehr gewähnt bei Homene mit Achashverischen. Als Homene gekommen zu gehen zu Achashverischen, hat ihm gesagt, dass ihm geben, als Alof ihm Kikar Kesef. Abise soll sein bei Yehudim Liyabdom, ist aber Achashverisch bedugme wie dem Baal HaTeil, wo hat gewollt befreit werden von dem Teil, hat ihm gesagt, Abi, nimm sie zu, und Hakesef nossen Loch, ich darf nicht um deine Geld, Parkett, Gott davon zufrieden. Atkan, der Moschel von Chazal. Was in dem Moschel nicht verstanden, das mir kann noch verstehen, als Achashverisch hat gehad hat Teil, gehad in der Kufchow, sei mit Dinis, kam Israel, Bnei Israel, bei Judim ken Jirbe. Wird das angerufen, bestimmt Teil. Wo der Nimschel, was Homen hat gehad, ein Loch, und wenn mir legt dahin zu rein Nieden, wo der Loch ist geglichen dem ganzen Schetter, und in was besteht reinlegen die Jiden, ist gleich in dem Schetter, durch was bei Yehudim Leyabda. Lichejere das Punkt verkehrt, wie ist gleich ein Loch. Wir können aufhören, nach Grube, Charitz, mit der Jinisch, jetzt bei der Metzies. Beschaß sie da bei Yehudim Leyabdam, sie wird das Metzies, kommen damit nicht das Film in Loch.
What's the meaning of the mound and the ditch? The Rebbe explains the making of an anti-Semite, the underlying cause of the condition. The anti-Semite's problem with the Jew is, you don't belong in my world. You people are a mound in my field. Get out. The Medrash says, Esau said to Jacob, Didn't we agree that this world is mine and the next world belongs to you? Now, why does the Jew bother him? Why does he irk him so much? God gave the Torah to the Jews, and with it, a higher purpose. And when the anti-Semite looks at the Jew, he sees a ditch in his own field, an emptiness in himself, a void. And this is the anti-Semite's Jewish problem. And it doesn't matter what the Jew does or doesn't do. It's not dependent on his actions. Every Jew is connected to Torah, and his very existence makes the anti-Semite feel inadequate.
Achashverosh hat gehad Tiden in sein Medinis. Hat das allein hat nicht geklost Ruhe. Und hat das, was Homen hat geschrien bei Hudim Lejavdem, der Fall, was gewusst, als hat nicht kentere. Hat ein Gefühl, als bei ihm ist da ein Puster Rot nicht angefühlt. Hat dazu da zwei Wege, was soll aufhören, fehlende Pusskeit. Ein Weg da, als soll werden hecher, wie ist, will nicht. Nur aber dann hat einen zweiten Weg. Sie gam lieg am Lochle hier. Bischass, keiner wird das nicht haben, wird nicht fühlen, kein Pusskeit. Und der Fahrer in die Toke Neze, was haben wir rechnet, aber Bischass mit Rachmon und Islam, ist dann nicht viel. Und Bischass mit Halten geschlossen, Sonntag und offen Schabbat. Und Bischass mit Reden auf denselben Loschen. Und Bischass mit haben dieselbe Lewusche, mit derselbe Minhoge, mit derselbe Dinim. Und mit Essen zusammen, mit Sudose, Shalese, Rosho, in Durur, wird werden seiner ein guter Freund. Sie Kohlsmann, sie da mit sie ist von Aiden, Kona goine sein ruhig.
So when we see anti-Semitism rear its ugly head, and when anti-Semitic rhetoric is on the rise in the public arena, what do we do? Now, historically, in the relationship between Jews and the non-Jews around them, we see two very different paths. And the Rebbe takes one case to illustrate the choice to be made between these two approaches. Toward the end of the First Temple era, around the year 3338, which is about the 4th century before the Common Era, Babylonia was a rising power in the ancient Near East, and its influence was being challenged by Egypt and Assyria. Israel is under Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, but there's major conflict amongst the Jews about where they should align themselves, with Nebuchadnezzar or the Egyptians and their pharaoh. Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah admonishes, begs really the Jews not to engage with Egypt, Assyria, and the other kings. The kindness of the nations is sin, he's basically saying. Creating an alliance with them will lead to your destruction. And in the very same breath, he delivers God's instructions to submit themselves to the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, whom Jeremiah himself had called the destroyer of nations. Approach them peacefully, he says.
Was al derech wieder sie gewähnt, bis man bis Amigdash rischen. Und das gewähnt, sie bis Amigdash sheni, und das gewähnt, bemeshech kol haderis, was gedele Yisroel ha'amitim. Wo sie ist gewähnt Teier, der Ingen von jüdischen Kiyum ist gewähnt bei Basachos, was man gesagt hat, von die Droch, mit darf man sich chesiden. Der Fall, was chesed, blum im Chattes, und das ist eine falsche Hoffnung. Und mit Schau drauf verlassen, nicht allweil soll man nicht genießigt werden, könnte jedes es sicher nicht sein. Und bei Basachos im See hat mir gesagt, dass auf dem zweiten Derech muss man gehen und man darf machen nicht stadtlos und man darf zahlen Geld, bis wann nicht man darauf gelegt Missim. Auf Ani Israel, nicht nur auf Aschiri Israel, auf viel auf Ani Israel, wenn Talmide Chachomim, gedem er soll haben Geld zu peilen bei dem und dem, nicht jeden, er soll alles helfen bei jedem. Wo schlichjede ist sich et chesed blum im Chatos und auf dem kommen sich sagen, mich eines konne rotes.
So which way is it? Do we engage in diplomacy and activism? Do we seek to create allies and alliances even with would-be enemies or true enemies to help mitigate the threats to our existence? Or do we say we rely on God? We exist despite these people rather than because of them, and it's more important to fortify ourselves spiritually.
Der Klall in der Ruf ist, wie sagt in Tilim, Azim Hashem leishomer bayis, eshof shokat shemer. Die erste Sache darf man bewahren, er soll sein, dass der Shem yishmer bayis. Und unter dem darf man Dinge nach Shemer, wo mein Simchin al-Hanes, und man darf tun, jenen Anachise bederach hateva. Und bischass mir sagt, als geht bei derach hateva. und mit nichts alle Unionen שבטבע. Und als darf sein, al Pitero, Berach Hashem Elkeche, Bechol Asher Tasse, sagt in Sifri, Jochel, Yeshiva Bottle, Talmud Lemer Asher Tasse, Tosni sitzt im Bottle, tu in derech Teva. Aber darfst du wissen sein, als früher darfst du zugreifen, als soll sein min Amuchen und Berach Hashem Elkeche. Der Verbindung und die Stadtlos geht in Asami Weg, als wird nicht Chazek der Reihen, von Kirche weizem Jodi Osel Yasachayel Azeh. Und wir können errichten den Meibischen von der zweiten Seite hier. Bemele nimmt Rob de Mezuse vechulu, is a Simen Ados geht auf den Weg, was der Lust nicht dem Hashem Yishmer bei ist. Ebo bereder, mir geht reden mit dem Goy, sagt a Kapitel Tili. Und danach, als Matzlich in dem Reden mit Nitiden, fühlt ein Gefühl von Dankbarkeit und will sich sagen, am zweiten Kapitel Tilim, nicht am Mismer Schelt Tfila, nur am Mismer Leseda, was Matzlich gewinnt in die Stadtlos. Oder das, was mir sagt, als Afalpi, was mich schechore bis am Migdasche Poske Nevuo, aber a Hischkin, wenn Nofel Posek Lefi, wie so das am Nevuo.
So where there's a prophet telling you what to do, obviously you follow his word. But for us, it's two steps. We absolutely need to be cautious and practical, increase our vigilance and security. We do need that security guard. But we need to first understand that it's God who's protecting us, and God wants us to take every precaution. And the sign that we're on the right path is very simple. If we're doing it with a greater commitment to observance, with a true sense of Jewish pride and gratitude to God, taking our cues for how to engage from Torah, then we know we're on the right path. Okay, that's very macro. The whole address is over 40 minutes, and these were obviously edited excerpts. For Yiddish speakers, we'll put the link to the full audio in the first comment below. It's really a fascinating analysis. But the bottom line is, like the Rebbe says, anti-Semitism is a thing. It's real and it exists, and you're not going to be able to eliminate it. Now, how do we deal with it? Let's go to some specific advice that the Rebbe gave in handling anti-Semitism. After the Six-Day War in 1967, the French president, Charles de Gaulle, decided to stop selling arms to the countries which had been involved in the conflict. Now, really, this move was against Israel, because the Arab countries were being supplied by Russia. In 1970, France suddenly announced that they'd be selling 110 Mirage fighter jets to Libya. Now, there was an outcry amongst many American Jews that this was a major threat to Israel and was anti-Semitic. So when de Gaulle's successor, President Pompidou, visited the United States, there were a series of very forceful demonstrations organized by Jews in Washington, D.C., New York, and Chicago. Now, this is a few months later.
Wenn der Präsident von Frankreich hat den Mann getan, Afghanistan, gerechnet am Frankreich, wird sich erschrecken, wo sie geworden auf morgen, Israel kommen sich schon erzählen, sie gewähren der Embargo. Afal Piquet hat verkauft, klein Neschek, aber dann die, was einen noch abpissen. Kleininke. Danach, als sie geworden, dort der Afghanistan, hat nicht gelassen, dass ich verkauft. Danach, als sie durchgegangen, nach Meschechs Mama hat aufgehört Siedler, hat weiter angeheben mit dem Tombach Hashoyi, hat Reis genommen 300 Tiden von Eretz Mitzrayim, und keine Afghanis, und kein Pirsum, und keine Unionen, und hat dann gesagt, die Zeitungen sollen wegen der Ruf nicht schreiben, mit der Wissach wegen der Ruf von der Goyische Zeitungen. Für was? Das ist ein Koche, der einzige Weg, was sie mit Kompelen bei Sehen Israel. Du Ruf, was mit kommt zu sehen, ist zu gehen jeder Tag und mich schreit, Herr Zechain, du bist der Sonne Israel, Herr Zechain, du bist der Gazlen mit Narizech und Chulu, nur man redet mit dem auf einem diplomatischen Weg, jener weiß, sei was mit Tracht wegen ihm, aber Vorteil benodem und 40, wer benodem 40. Woher komme, das, was mit tut, Bachscheu von der kommunistischen Medine. Vorne Reis, Miedisch, Joschavu, Beschavu, von dort in der Fall, was man macht, nicht kein Afghanis. Und die, was sie seinen mag in der Afghanistan gegen Russland, das sie allein angesagt. Aber wir sollten mit Farsen sein, von der Medine führt man nach Reis. Bescheid haben gesehen, dass Pompidou hat abgestellt, verkäfen die Kleneschek. ist geworden, Eis Afghanistan gegen Pompidou, hat zurückgegeben, verkaufen die kleinen Ktanim und hat rausgenommen 300 Tiden von Franken.
Pompidou was so angered by the violent protests that they caused a major diplomatic flare-up, and his whole trip to the U.S. almost ended in disaster. President Nixon had to fly down to New York especially to calm him down. In a talk in 1970 on a Shabbos, obviously not recorded on tape, the Rebbe says that he asked somebody about a similar situation. Why are you running around and crying anti-Semitism when you see it's simply not effective in changing anything? And the fellow replied, I figured it out 10 years ago, that this is the way to operate, and I don't have time to rethink it. Stop telling me what to do. And the Rebbe adds that these very vocal efforts might only succeed to attract attention to the individuals or organizations leading those efforts, rather than affecting any real change. A note I'd like to share. In this whole piece, we're only referring to a certain type of anti-Semitism. For example, the Rebbe had a very vocal and robust approach to Israel and how it must defend itself by any and all means without apology, and how Israel must be so strong militarily that her enemies are afraid to attack. Now, these issues are for a different program. The next anecdote I'd like to share is about a letter written to the Rebbe by Professor Alan Dershowitz.
When I was involved in politics and civil rights and human rights, the enemy of civil rights and civil liberties was Jesse Helms, the United States Senator from North Carolina. He stood against everything that I stood for, and many of my friends and colleagues stood for, and so I was a little surprised, disappointed, when Jesse Helms was honored by the Rebbe in Chabad. And so I wrote a very polite letter to the Rebbe, who I had met previously a number of times, respectfully wondering why they chose to honor a man who was against integration, was against gay rights, women's rights, equality for all. And the Rebbe wrote back a very poignant, very powerful letter saying, we honor not only to recognize the past, but to influence the future, and watch carefully to see whether or not we have had an influence on the conduct of Jesse Helms.
The Rebbe actually wrote a 3.5-page letter explaining to Professor Dershowitz that, first of all, Senator Helms was not an honoree, but he came to an event at the Capitol along with other senators and congressmen in order to pay tribute to a Jew and a Jewish movement. The Rebbe writes that he's long been concerned about the state of our nation's public schools and the American family and society, and the event was geared to upgrading the ethical and moral foundations of education. It's really a fascinating letter. We'll get it up online and put a link in the first comment. After a full 2 pages, the Rebbe signs off, and then there's a 1.5-page PS. I'll quote a few sentences. The Rebbe is writing to Professor Dershowitz. I trust you will agree that in regard to persons of influence, whether in Washington or elsewhere, the first objective should be to persuade and encourage such a person to use his influence in a positive way in behalf of any and all good causes which are important to us. We should welcome every public appearance which lends public support to the cause, especially when there's a likelihood that it may be the forerunner of similar pronouncements in the future. And the Rebbe gives several examples, and he continues. My experience with such people has convinced me that politicians are generally motivated more by expediency than by conviction. In other words, their public pronouncements on various issues do not stem from categorical principles or religious imperative. Hence, most of them, if not all, are subject to change in their positions depending on time, place, and other factors. I believe, therefore, that the proper approach to such persons by Jewish leaders should not be rigid. As a rule, it does no good to engage in a cold war, which may often turn into a hot war, nor does it serve any useful purpose to brand one as an enemy or an anti-Semite, however tempting it is to do so. It can only be counterproductive. On the contrary, ways and means should be found to persuade such a person to take a favorable stance, at least publicly. We haven't too many friends, and attaching labels, etc., will not gain us any.
And sure enough, very shortly after he was honored, he assumed a very influential role in the United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee and became one of the strongest supporters of Israel and strongest supporters of the nation state of the Jewish people, and of other Jewish causes as well. And obviously the Rebbe had an enormous influence on persuading Jesse Helms that even with his very conservative values, he could become a beacon for the Jewish state.
Here's another specific piece of advice. Rabbi Yeshua Kling was the Rabbi of Lyon, France for 8 years, and thereafter the Rabbi of Nice. In a meeting with the Rebbe in the mid-1970s, he asked about a problem they were having with antisemitism. And the Rebbe told him that in most cases, antisemitism, in a political movement, a certain population or demographic, comes from the heads of the group more than the people. The public is influenced by what they're seeing from their leaders and takes their cues from them. For this reason, the way to operate is to build connections with these leaders and try and convince them to work against antisemitism or at least to stop practicing it. And if you're not successful in those efforts, at least you've done what you can. God only expects us to do our best. Another pointer. In a 1962 letter to Menachem Begin, who was eventually the Prime Minister of Israel, at the time the head of the Cherut party, the Rebbe writes, "The true reason that anti-Semites hate Jews is because we are different, but they always put it on something else. Where the Jews are well off, they hate us because we're rich. Where they're impoverished, they hate the Jews because they're so needy. So there's not really much point in answering the specific attack because it's not what's going to make a friend of the anti-Semite." Now let's look at a number of cases where the Rebbe himself was confronted with anti-Semitism. His responses, I think, are very telling. In late 1991, the Rebbe writes a letter to someone in the office of the President of Poland. They had written apologizing for an anti-Semitic incident in Warsaw. The Rebbe thanks him for writing and then continues. "You express the hope that in the future intolerance and prejudice will disappear from the Polish people and that you are working toward this end. We appreciate the sentiments expressed in your letter and we pray that your hope and efforts will materialize very soon indeed." Our sages explain why the creation of man differed from the creation of other living species and why, among other things, man was created as a single individual, unlike other living creatures created in pairs. One of the reasons is that it was God's design that the human race, all humans everywhere and at all times, should know that each and all descend from the one and the same single progenitor, a fully developed human being created in the image of God, so that no human being could claim superior ancestral origin. Hence, they'd also find it easier to cultivate a real feeling of kinship in all interhuman relationships. Now, this gets to a key aspect of the Rebbe's response to anti-Semitism. In the cases we can find, the Rebbe responds to each situation by doing his best to diffuse it, rather than taking the bait to stoke any passions. During the Crown Heights riots in the summer of 1991, when a number of organizations and politicians came to the Rebbe to express their horror and outrage at what was going on, the Rebbe basically responds in a very, shall we call it, universal manner. He doesn't say, "Those anti-Semites, down with them," but really tries to make it about emphasizing what we share in common.
I want to express my condolence for the tragic events in Crown Heights and to assure you that the majority of my people in this city, in this country, sympathize with what happened, no matter what the media says. The media make it seem as if we're against each other. We are much more together, much more alike, and they will prefer to see.
Dear God Almighty bless you. You certainly know that the Jewish people is accustomed to persecution, and the same thing happened in the United States to youth people at the beginning. That from now on, that will have every one of us and all the population of the United States only good news and healthy news and news about the progress of every one of us, that the United States will be united really and all the year around, not when something happens, but all the year round in good conditions and the happy conditions.
I spoke to the President's office about this. I called and gave them our concern. I spoke to the civil rights, to Mr. Dunn in Washington, who was the Assistant Attorney General in charge of civil rights. And I've been in constant contact with Mr. Maloney to see to it that the federal government will be using all of its authority and power to monitor the situation and to see to it that people's rights are protected.
God Almighty bless you and all your co-workers, till the President himself to be very successful in all your endeavors, till the situation will change so that there will be no need for special protection, that it to be all in a quiet manner, in a happy manner, and that we are approaching the Jewish year. It will be a good year, a good time for all the people of the United States, and New York especially.
Captain Kennedy, our new captain from the 71st Precinct.
Yeah, God Almighty bless you and thank you for your protection and for all your good intention, and God Almighty bless you to go from strength to strength.
And here's New York City's Mayor David Dinkins, actually a few months before the riots.
Here and go from strength to strength in all things necessary, especially for the benefit of the multitude of nationalities in New York, that is a kind of a melting pot for many nations. I hope that in the near future the melting pot will be so active that it will be not necessary to underline every time that they are Negro and they are white and they are Hispanic, etc., because there is no difference. All of them are created by the same God and created for the same purpose, to add all good things around them and around, especially beginning by themselves and their families.
Let's talk about the cause that the Rebbe spoke about in the beginning. How do we fill the void? How do we address the emptiness that gives rise to hate and intolerance? People need meaning, a sense of higher purpose. And there's a society around us. We're not living in a vacuum. And there are many related areas that play right into this, topics that the Rebbe spoke on a lot. For example, the Rebbe has a very strong opinion on the importance of a moment of silence in the U.S. public school system. We did a full program on that. We'll put the link below. The Rebbe spoke quite a bit on the 7 universal laws that God gave for all of humanity. Here's one example.
Hat man gesehen bepeil, am Naturgebäude, a ganze Schiete von Chukim, wo sie gewähren gebuht durch das Volk, was hat sich gerechnet zwischen der entwickelsten Völker, von den gebildeten Völkern. Und bei sie Gufe hatten das Gebäude alles von der Chire-Seele und Philosophie-Seele und Aschkofa-Selem-Seele und Und danach hat man das übergegeben, was sie mit da vielen Befehl hat man gesehen, es hat gebracht, wie Kaomur Lehil, a Churban und a Heres und a Tehu, shele hoyo meelam kamehu. Wo der einzige Bewohner nicht dazu ist, wie der Mond früher, a der Hanhoge Soele mit Gebuit auf der Ruf, als sie da am Itzius, was Mamitis Himotze nimmt zu Kolhan im Zeug, und unter dem Itzius hat übergegeben, durch Neshe Rabbeinu, a herois Bruris Teiro in a Nefen, in a lichtig Nefen, und hat das übergegeben, nicht der geloske nein und einzigen Menschen in der Welt, für welchen sie nicht gegeben geworden, a Hero, was darf sich fühlen wie der Mond früher, a die Sheva Mitzvahs, der Sheva Mitzvahs Klolies. Und jeder von sie hat a Ribui Proti, und am 40 in seher Weg, ist also dämmelt wird das Losheves Yitzora. Und auch da kommt, wie bald das sie verbunden mit Teras Meshe, hat jeder Ried, Nesef Avdru, was darf sich mit Stadl sein, Nekaim sein alle Tarjag Mitzvahs, was ist angesagt geworden als Said, Keble Leche, dem Zivui, was hat. Lichtig machen die Welt herum sich, worin der Schlemus von Aiden besteht in der Ruhe, was tut, Kol Hatolui Bey, auf hereinbringen Schlemus in der Welt herum sich.
So we owe this to the society around us to share it with them, and the side benefit is that we'll be healing that emptiness and preventing the next Haman from having a ditch in his field. Before we wrap up, let's summarize briefly the key points and then share something in conclusion. Number one, we need to realize that God protects us and will continue to do so. Number two, do engage in practical security, the natural means through which we protect ourselves. 3, exert your influence through quiet diplomacy, but it must be with a backbone. Don't lose your pride in yourself as a Jew and in your Jewish observance. 4, it's not effective to scream that someone is an anti-Semite. On the contrary, where possible, do your best to engage them. Number 5, concentrate on leaders rather than the followers. 6, don't spend your energy answering specific accusations against the Jews. 7, emphasize how we're all in the image of God, the things that all human beings share. Now, this is what we found on the topic. If we missed anything, please tell us in the comments below or email me at es@jemedia.org. I'd like to thank Rabbi Chalim Meshulavin, who worked for many weeks on the research, locating this material, Rabbi Yitzchak Tzap, who worked with me on developing the content, Eli Sapo for coordinating and producing this project, Yisrael Silman, who's behind the camera, and the rest of the GEM team. And a huge thank you to our supporters who made this all possible, in particular, the members of the GEM Foundation. In conclusion, one final important point. The Rebbe never let anti-Semitism take too much of his time and energy. He never got too caught up with it. In almost every case, his emphasis was on what we need to do, on strengthening Jewish pride and practice. Help build a strong and proud Jewish identity. Do another mitzvah. Be a light unto the society around you. Only light can really chase away darkness.
With materials from the Living Archive, established by the Rohr Family Foundation. Video collection preserved by Benjamin Federman in tribute to his parents.